I now turn to Ranking Member Duckworth.
Thank you, Chairman Cruz, and thank you to Ranking Member Cantwell, who we will be hearing from later. Welcome to our witnesses. I'm disappointed that the acting administrator was unavailable, but I thank you each for being here. I look forward to hearing about FAA's efforts to implement the FAA reauthorization law, but I must first address the recent critical safety lapses that we've seen. Close calls, a deadly crash, equipment outages, these are all terrible, but unfortunately, they're not a surprise. Alarm bells have been ringing about near misses and aging equipment for years. We've held hearings, we've passed the FAA bipartisan reauthorization bill, but there is so much more work to do. We need both a long and a short-term plan, and that's what I hope we'll hear from the FAA today. A large-scale overhaul of our air traffic control system will take years. In the meantime, we need to know what FAA is doing now to prevent another tragedy. How is FAA ensuring that other airports don't experience the type of radar and communications failures impacting Newark? What is FAA's plan for inspection, maintenance, and testing to ensure redundancy and resiliency system-wide? FAA needs to be proactively looking for risk and mitigating it. Yet, FAA failed to spot a clear trend of helicopter-related near misses near DCA. After 67 people died, FAA permanently closed the risky helicopter route, but even that long overdue action failed to fully solve the problem. Coordination failures between the FAA and the military has continued to put the flying public at risk. In March, after the deadly January 29th crash, a departing flight came within 200 vertical feet of an Air Force jet conducting a flyover of Arlington Cemetery. More recently, another Army helicopter from the same brigade involved in January's deadly crash came within 200 feet of a commercial flight near the Pentagon. These are foreseeable risks. And in the aftermath of the worst deadly aviation incident on U.S. soil since the horrific Colgan Air crash, the administration's lack of a more aggressive, proactive mitigation approach is simply inexcusable. FAA and DoD must coordinate better. We don't need to wait for the completion of a lengthy investigation to know that. Look, I know this is complicated. I've flown Black Hawk helicopters in Chicago's Class B airspace. It is always among the top 3 most busiest airspace in the nation, and it's not easy in the best of circumstances. But there are things that can be done to mitigate these risks. Following the DCA crash, my colleagues and I asked FAA to proactively review helicopter operations in other busy commercial airspace, and I appreciate FAA taking this urgently needed action. But let's be honest, that required a request from me, the ranking member, and the chairman of this committee to spur this kind of proactive risk analysis. The fact that it took those requests to have that analysis done is hardly inspiring. So I hope we'll hear from FAA today about what it is doing proactively in the near term to prevent more Newark-type failures while Congress considers longer-term reforms. I also hope to get an explanation from FAA about its staff cuts. How do they think these are going to help FAA meet this safety-critical moment? How do they think these cuts are going to help them implement FAA reauthorization law on time? Earlier this year, FAA fired hundreds of probationary workers. In addition, 700 FAA employees reportedly accepted FAA's first deferred resignation offer, and more than 2,000 are now projected to accept it in a second round. Acting Administrator Rocheleau has said FAA expects further reductions in force. We've been told the administration isn't terminating air traffic controllers or others who are critical for safety. But FAA's entire mission is literally safety, and everybody who works there is there to support that mission. Implementation of the FAA reauthorization law is also critical for safety. For example, the law requires FAA to establish realistic airplane evacuation standards that take into account the presence of carry-on bags, seniors, children, and people with disabilities, none of which were included in recent FAA in-person simulations. The law also sets hiring targets for air traffic controllers, advances airport surface surveillance, and expands the Aviation Workforce Development Grant Program to help recruit and train future pilots, mechanics, and aviation manufacturing technical workers. All of these were supported in a bipartisan way out of this committee. Importantly, the law also makes long overdue reforms to improve accessibility and safety for passengers with disabilities so they can travel with the dignity that all Americans deserve. For example, it requires FAA to establish minimum training standards for airline staff to assist passengers using wheelchairs with boarding and deplaning, and training for how to handle wheelchairs and scooters so they will be damaged less frequently. I look forward to our discussion today, and I yield back.